Good morning, Mario. And first of all, let me take time to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to Lotus Limited and all of our members regarding your time with Team Lotus in Formula One. Many of our members remember watching your driving feats live when they happened, and they're ecstatic to be able to get a few questions answered by you today.
Sure, no problem. Thanks for being here, by the way.
Oh, thanks for the invite. And we'll start first with some of your time behind some of the Lotus cars that you got to drive. And it saw you behind the wheel of a few race cars that are considered historically important due to their design and their performance. So we're going to cover those a little bit first. And of course, we're going to start with the 78 and the ground effects car that a lot of our members are so interested to know some details about from you. And the 78 car really brought some technology that became uniform throughout the field. And during the development, it was kind of rumored that Colin Chapman and Tony Rudd agreed to keep the car secret because I think they knew that it was going to be a really hot car. How much did you know about going into this, about the potential development that was going on to it? And when you finally got to drive it, what was your first feeling behind the wheel?
You know, there's so much misconception on what you just said.
Okay.
Because at the end of 1976, which in 1976, Colin, when I joined after Long Beach, he was apologetic. He said, Mario says, I really don't have a really good car, you know, at this time. But at that point, I said, Colin, if you come back racing full time, I said, we'll make this thing work. And that's really what he did. He just delegated responsibilities for the car company, the boat company, and he did come back full-time racing because that's what the team needed. And so at the end of the season, we all had a meeting. There was the designers was Martin Ogilvy, it was Peter Wright, it was Bellamy, and so we were all just kicking things around, you know, as to what we should pursue as far as the new car. And this is some area that I don't get the credit, you know, where a lot of people have a little amnesia, quite honestly. But from a driver standpoint, my comment at that time was, you know what, I'd like to have more downforce with no drag penalty, you know, which, okay, you know, everybody laughing. Well, at that point, you know, a lot of that was not, you know, known as far as, you know, what we finally wound up with, ground effects. But I cited an example to them that sparked a lot of ideas. And that is when I was driving the March car in 1970 for STP. Was actually STP was sponsoring the team, but we had a private entry, and we were in South Africa testing, and because of obviously altitude, the track at Kailami, you know, you don't have as much engine power because of normally aspirated engines. So we thought, I wonder if, you know, how we can take some drag out of the car without really, you know, compromising anything. And the March car had two side pods, which actually, if you look at the photos of that car, it was like a shape of a wing. And so we said, you know what, those side pods don't do anything. They're really aerodynamic, you know, so maybe they create drag. Okay. And so we took them off. This was during the test. We took them off, and all of a sudden, the front end started flying on a car. And we said, oh my God, now I need more front wing and all of that. So, and this is what I told them. I said, with those side pods, we were getting downforce. But those side pods didn't have a fence. In other words, to direct the flow. So a lot of air was spilling out, so they were not really efficient. So the Lotus 78 was born with side pods with a fence. And obviously, you know, it provided some downforce because the side pod was much longer, had, you know, the shape of a wing. And so I went, okay, the car obviously had, you know, more downforce than we would have experienced without it, of course. But we really found what the car needed when we were testing in Germany at Hockenheim. And at Hockenheim, at the end of the two long straightaways, I think it was called the Bosch curve, just almost like in Austria. It was a long right-hander, and I remember going through there and telling Colin, I says, you know, Colin, right in the middle of the corner, I'm really feeling a lot of downforce, and he came to a conclusion that the side pod was closing the distance, from to the ground, and so it was making the side pod more efficient. So he sent, I don't know if it was Bob Dance or somebody, to get some plastic strips to cover, to close that gap. And so I went out there, and all of a sudden, and but then, 3 laps later, the stuff wears and everything else. So in order to make it last, for a few races, we ran brushes. The brush was like, sweeping the track type of thing. But with the brushes, it was not as effective, of course. It was still spillage, but it was better than, the plastic strip which would have worn, So, and after the brush, that's where the movable skirts were born. Now, going back to what you're talking about as far as the secrecy and everything else, I think some of that is made up because we didn't know. We knew we were going to have a better car, no question. I mean, it was a lot of thought was going into it, but the end result, as far as the proper ground effect, we didn't know. As a matter of fact, if you look at the Lotus 78, even at the exit of the diffusers, it's very busy. It's not really clean, and this is what they, obviously they did a lot of that. And for the Lotus 79, just cleaned up the exit of the diffusers, and a lot of stuff was learned. But again, I take a little bit of credit for just implanting some idea as to why we started with these side pods, and that's a fact, and that's a fact.
When it came down to the development, whether it was pre-season or during the race season, how much did you get to impact the design and development of a car?
No, I can't take credit for that in impacting. The only thing that obviously take credit as a driver to give feedback, and that's what the engineers needed, because once we have the basic concept and we were learning these aspects like closing the gap, with on those fences on the side pods, obviously then a lot of other things started coming to light. And then the engineers had to, then they would go in a wind tunnel, and that's what I think that's when they started the moving road wind tunnel, with this ground effect. That's what they needed, because up to that point, it was just a steady, just a regular wind tunnel like they do for sports cars. But, before they went to ground effects. But again, then, engineers obviously, just were working feverishly to, to improve this, that, and the other. And then changed the angle of the diffuser in the back and all of that. But as far as going back to your question, did I have any technical input? Not really. My input was just feel. Here's the way the car feels. Here's what we're feeling. And then they would take over. It was strictly team effort, no question. But what was really interesting and fascinating about all of this was that it was a big breakthrough. There was so much to be found out, and things that were very effective, very efficient, and not normally totally understood. We didn't. So there was a lot of estimating going on. As you can see, you didn't have computer data and all of that. I don't think we had any pressure taps at that point yet to find out just where this, the flow, the airflow, where the center pressure was and all of that. So a lot of it was, seat of the pants, and then the engineers would just go out there and try to tweak this and tweak that. And it was a full year of development, really, in 1977 with that when obviously paid off well, when when the 79 came out.
A lot of our members might not realize or be able to get a good feeling for the type of downforce that you got from the ground effects. Is there a good way you can kind of describe what it kind of felt like to go from a Formula One car in the years beforehand to the performance that you would get from the ground effects? And did it change at all how you ended up driving the car versus some previous models?
No, I mean, you know, Brian, downforce is downforce, and by that I mean it gives you a sense of stability, you know, through the corners. And there were a lot of drawbacks. We didn't have as much of an advantage as a lot of people think. You know, we had an advantage, but I mean, there were a lot of other things that were creeping in there, you know, that were an issue. And with downforce, you had to just compromise your spring rates and everything else to figure out, you know, how to handle, you know, the downforce that you get at top speed versus the slow corners. It was, I mean, we had a job in our hands, you know, and but again, you know, going back to the downforce aspect, a driver, you adapt, you know, to whatever the car tells you, and but the feel of stability and so forth, something that any driver appreciates. You know, it's what you're looking for. And this was giving us, again, you know, some downforce without total penalty of obviously the surface aerodynamics, which is, you know, the wings. With, you know, okay, one downforce, but you're gonna, you know, go slower, you know, on the straightaway and all that. The ground effects, there's still some penalty, but nowhere near as to what the surface wings are.
We read an interview that you'd put out for one of the Formula One magazines saying that you enjoyed driving the 78. You found it a more satisfying drive than the eventual championship-winning 79. Was that, am I quoting that correctly? And if so, why was that the case?
Oh, well, I mean, the 78 actually was a breakthrough, you know, so I was deriving probably a little more satisfaction. The 79 was, you know, something that was a continuous development. But the one thing that I had a continuous fight with Colin Chapman about the 79 was he never realized that we were running out of brakes. You know, Ronnie could tell you. What was happening is, as I said earlier, they had to clean up the exit of the diffusers in the back. And we used to have inboard brakes in the rear. And so in order to be able to obviously clean up the area, they moved, Colin had Hewlin cast a gearbox where half of the calipers, brake caliper, would be magnesium, and the other half were aluminum. And but they were right. The calipers were cast into the gearbox, which means they were soaking in all of the temperature from the gearbox. So early into the race, you know, with full tanks and everything else, which we, you know, you very seldom would run full tanks, but we always would be running out of brakes because the brake fluid would be boiling on the rear brakes. And so you had to pump, you know, you had a heck of a time, you know, just going on the street, you had to keep pumping, you know, the brakes. And I remember like the one race in Monza where I passed Villeneuve right on the last lap, and I kept trying to save the brakes, I mean, I thought my foot was going right through the front of the nose because, you know, I gone into the Ascari curve, and it was that because we even almost every race that we won, you know, with just very little brakes. So because of that, I used to really have said, for God's sakes, and I would tell Colin, you know, and he'd bugger off, you know, type of thing. And because as soon as the car would sit there, and it's a mechanics go over and this, on the brakes would be right there, you know, because the thing would cool down just enough or take one pump. But that it did not believe us, you know. So we ran that whole basic season, and it really, really hurt me at Tiglan. Because Tiglan at the end of that year, I started, but I think we dropped out of the race anyway. But I envied Carlos Reutemann in the Ferrari because he was out braking me so badly, you know. And And so, like, we had some shortcomings. Like everybody, it was not a bed of roses as far as even the wins that we've had. We fought it, but overall, like an overall package, I mean, we were blessed. Ronnie and I, and then Gunnar Wilson, for with just a wonderful, wonderful car, wonderful piece.
Well, once again, you seem to know where I'm going to go with these questions. So thank you very much, because I was actually going to ask about the brakes on the car as well. So
That's good.
Thanks for covering that as well. And I'd like to take a step back a little bit to your first drive in Formula One with the Lotus 49.
Yeah.
And what did it feel like to get into a Formula One car? Was it different than what you've experienced beforehand? And did any of your previous race experience prepare you for what you would eventually experience in Formula One?
Well, the first part of the question, was it really different? Oh, yes, it was, but in the right way. And by that I mean, everything prepares you for something. Obviously, when I met Colin Chapman and Jim Clark back in '65 at Indianapolis, when I was Rookie of the Year and he won the race, I finished third and all of that. So I was trying really hard to get noticed, by them, because back in my mind, I always had this, obviously, this goal of getting into Formula One. And after the banquet, we're saying our goodbyes. I said to Colin, Colin, someday I would like to do Formula One. And he says, Mario, he said, when you think you're ready, he says, you call me. So immediately I started lobbying like crazy, to USAC to bring in some road racing into the series. And in '65, that year, I don't know if it just happened by accident that year, but we had the first road race in the series, which was Indianapolis Raceway Park, which I won, actually. In fact, there was another road race in a midget at Lime Rock in 1963, which I won as well. So road racing was really what I wanted, and so anyway, going forward in 1968, after I did, another thing. Right after he said that, Ford came on with this very ambitious Le Mans program, which obviously turned out to be extremely successful. And they were so committed that they were doing a lot of testing and so on and so forth. And I was, part of the Ford team. And I said, guys, anytime you're testing anywhere in the world, I'm there. So I wanted to get as much running on road course running under my belt as possible. And so again, between that and then some of the USAC races and so on and so forth, because even in USAC, I was between Dan Gurney and I, we were pretty much winning, the road races. And that year in '68, I won both the Canadian races, Mont Tremblant and all that. So anyway, I was as prepared as I thought, I could be at the moment. So I called Colin. I said, I'd like to do the last two races of the season, which would be Monza and Watkins Glen. And he said, right. He said, I'll have a car for you. So my first experience in a Formula One car was at Monza. And what a better place, because that's, where my dream really began about Formula One when I was 14 years old. And so anyway, we go and I had been used to, again, the sports cars, much heavier and so forth. And we had won, we won Sebring '67 with Bruce McLaren and, a lot of things happening. So, but then I never experienced a nimble Formula One, which is obviously the purest of the road racing machines. And as soon as I got in and, fitted up and I went out there, I said, oh my God, this is what I was waiting for. And it just felt so much part of the car. And so we came away from Monza. We set a track record, in that test. In fact, we beat the Ferrari that Chris Amon had run 2 weeks before. They tested and they set a record, and we beat that record. It was my first experience. And so I figured, oh my gosh, I said, I love that. But it's a long story. I'm not going to get into as to why Monza didn't happen, because I had to come back on a Saturday to race in a Hoosier 100 in a dirt race and then go back. And because of the 24-hour rule, which they were going to waive, they didn't let us start. It was, I say us, because I got Bobby Unser a ride with the BRM so we could slipstream qualifying. And that was something that was very meaningful there in those days, to do some slipstreaming to qualify. But anyway, my first real race in Formula One was the Watkins Glen. And there's, put the car on pole. I had never seen the Glen before. I never raced there. It was as foreign as any other track to me. But again, the car, going back to the feel, the Formula One car, vis-a-vis anything else that I had experienced up to that point, it was just right. I mean, it was my world. I said, this can definitely be my rodeo.
You've had the opportunity to drive a lot of different Lotus cars throughout, especially the historic race cars that we've all seen on TV. And a lot of them only exist in private collection nowadays. Can you speak to a little bit of the Lotus 49 and how you thought it would have, and I know you've already kind of talked about how nimble it was compared to the other, the cars you've driven beforehand. As you got more context in Formula One, how did you feel that the Lotus compared to its contemporaries? And to jump back to the 79 as well, you drove other cars before and after. How do you feel the Lotus fit in with its contemporaries in the race series?
Well, it's hard for me to make a comparison because I would have had to, drive some of the contemporaries, and once you're with the firm, you're with that. But, the Lotus obviously, it was 49 was very, very, as far as the times with the high wing directly on the upright, and it was very efficient, so there were a lot of good things going with that car. So it was, if I put that thing on pole, that means it was competitive, It just can do miracles, but, and again, there were other cars that I drove, like 2 years later, in South Africa, with a Ferrari, I won my first race, with a Ferrari. So the Ferrari at the time seems to me like, the very well-balanced car and the car of the moment, at least for that race anyway. But later on, I won also, at Ontario, the twin 100s there. And, it was meaningful because, that all of these races at the beginning that I won, the guy that was really the yardstick at the time was Jackie Stewart. And when I put the car on pole at the Glen, Stewart was second. And when I won my first race in South Africa with Ferrari, Jackie Stewart was second. And when I won in Ontario, also there was 2 100-mile races. I won both, and Jackie Stewart was second. So there was extra value to that, of course, because, if you win a race, it always puts a premium as to who finishes second to you, and so that in itself, is something for me naturally to, feel good about.
Particularly the last answer, this one kind of left me speechless a little bit to hear you talk about whether it's the cars and the tracks and how you really got started in Formula One. But you mentioned some of the other drivers on the field, and you've had a great opportunity to work alongside a lot of different drivers, whether it's Hill, Rindt, Peterson, Nielsen, Ariel, Rudiman, Mansell, and DeAngelis. Can you speak to what it was like to work with these people, especially within Team Lotus, but any others that you might feel be worth noting as teammates and within the Formula One racing series?
Well, I mean, these were all extremely competitive drivers, that day in and day out had to measure up against. And to me, I feel there was a lot of mutual respect, among us. Because of human nature, you get on with some better than others, obviously. But that's nothing new, if you will. And, I never had any issues, with any of my teammates. With some, we befriended. We used to enjoy time together with our own families and all that, so it brings you that much closer. Gunnar Nielsen was one, obviously, and Ronnie Peterson was the other, but we had others, you know, Clay Regazzoni, you know. There's always a lot of camaraderie, but, you know, when you have a teammate on your team, then all of a sudden, you know, all the friendship, everything just leaves you when, you know, when you're in that cockpit, because, you know, it's a very selfish, you know, any sport is a very selfish situation. You know, if your stock goes up, mine goes down. Mine goes up, yours goes down. So I'd rather have mine go up, if you will. Everybody's the same. So you don't necessarily share everything that that you know about things, and you wish that they would share with you what they know. But it's very proprietary, and there's a lot of mind games that you play, you know, and all that. And you know, with all of that, there's a lot of fun because we try to suck each other out, you know, and we lie like hell to one another and all that. You know, but that's happened, you know, throughout my career, you know, with teammates especially, or friends that you try to just pick their brain and all that, and you know, you never get a straight answer on things, you know, but then at the same time you never give a straight answer either, you know. So it's all part, like I said, it's part of the game.
Yeah, it's was there any driver in particular that, and you don't have to pick one, but maybe one that you really enjoyed a teammate battle or challenge with throughout your career?
Yeah, for sure, Ronnie Peterson. It was one. There was, you know, there was this misconception that he couldn't pass me on the track, which is cock bull, you know. And he used to say, you know, like, okay, at the end, if there was the last couple of races or something, that was one didn't have a chance at the championship, you know. But you know, many times, like we were in Holland, you know, the 78, and I had an exhaust brake on the right side, exhaust pipe, and it burnt the diffuser on the right side, so I didn't have much downforce on the right side of the car, and I really struggled with that thing. And Ronnie was right on my bumper, and a couple of times he tried to get under me going in Tarzan corner, because the corner coming onto the straighter was flat, just about. I mean, it had to be just like that flat, and I was really struggling through this. So coming on the straighter, he was really, and he slipped streaming, and then chopped him a few times, and he says, "You bugger all," he says, "why don't you let me at least lead a couple of laps?" You know, I said, "No way." You know, so like I said, and it was great. Later on, you know, we just kid about it, you know, had a good fun, and it doesn't always happen with all of them, you know, but he was just the nicest guy. It was like brothers. We were like, he was much taller, but we were like brothers.
One that I really like to know is, you've achieved so much on the world stage as a race driver, flying under the American flag and racing under the American flag. And you've worked your way up from, obviously coming over from Italy, and then eventually racing in the States, the highest level of motor racing. Were there any particular steps along this path that you felt were the most impactful parts to making you the racing driver that you are? Maybe a racing series that you raced in that really stood out to you as a fundamental part in you developing your racing skill. And is there any, and we don't see many current drivers flying under the American flag, especially in the international series, and do you see that changing in the future?
Well, first of all, you know, for the first part of the question, as far as, you know, series and so forth, that, you know, basically you think, you know, prepares you for that, is, to me, I was going through my career, and there was always a path to the top level. Once you reach the top level, then in our sport has, you know, different disciplines at the top level that that sometimes, for me, they created a lot of interest and challenge, and I had the opportunity along the way to race with some of the top teams, same sports prototypes, and so on and so forth, and that's why I would, you know, venture, you know, in all these areas, and I found that not only just an incredible challenge, but a tremendous benefit for me because of the experience that you gather just by getting the feel from all these different animals. And because overall, things always cross over. And so I found a benefit. I'll give you, for instance, from driving on the dirt races and dirt championships and so on and so forth in USAC, sprint cars or champ cars. You know, on the dirt, conditions change almost every other lap and so on and so forth. And you're always searching for grip. And I found that to be beneficial in road racing in the wet. In the wet, almost every lap is different, you know, and then it starts drying, and you're searching for grip, this and that, and it's about adapting. So can you imagine dirt track racing helping you in Formula One in the wet? It did. For me, it did. You know, so all of these things are part of, you know, the career and what went on, and what part of what kept me really fascinated throughout. As far as like, just you mentioned about the flag, you know, representing your own country. To me, there was no prouder moments in Formula One, being obviously a truly international series, to represent your country on the top step of the podium, you know, where the national anthem plays. The national anthem plays, you know, in all of our national races, but when you're abroad, it's got a totally different meaning, just like being in the Olympics. And I found that to be exhilarating, you know. It says, how proud. And I'll tell you another one. From any driver standpoint, there's incredible pride to win your own Grand Prix. And in 1977, I won the USGP at Long Beach, and I also won my native Grand Prix at Monza. So I won 2 of my home Grand Prix, and a lot of people don't know that. But you talk about the personal satisfaction and to be able to achieve that. So when I look back, you know, I said, was I ever blessed, you know? And going back to going on to the future now, I obviously with an American company owning Formula One, basically, I hope that might encourage a little bit of, you know, to give some of our champions, like Joseph Newgarden, for instance, you know, he's talking about, you know, he'd love to have a shot at Formula One, to just have an opportunity to have maybe a top team give him a try, you know, and I think it would be good for the sport in general. The same thing, it was good when Fernando Alonso came to Indianapolis. It's good, not only good for just IndyCar, but for Formula One and for the sport in general, to have this crossover. I think Formula One, even especially if we, but look at how popular COTA is, you know, Austin has become now. And if they're talking about having a second race here in the United States, which would be awesome. To increase the popularity, I mean, it would be only natural to potentially have, you know, a homegrown driver in there. So I would love, obviously, to see that. You know, there were not enough of us, you know, that made noise in Formula One, so we need somebody else to start doing that.
Well, I certainly hope Watkins Glen comes to the top of that list, and we'll see if that ever happens for the second F1 race. But talking a little about the dirt tracks and some of the other tracks you've had a chance to drive on, whether it's Watkins Glen with your first win or winning at Monza, do you have a favorite track that you really enjoyed? And if you did, is it because of the challenging nature of driving the track or the history in which the track exists?
Well, all of that. As far as, you know, looking for, I never tried to qualify, you know, the tracks, you know, say, oh, I like this one, I don't like that one. Because if you say, I don't like where I'm going this next weekend, that means you're already looking at a negative. So I try not to really to look at things that way. But there are obviously some tracks that are more challenging than others. You know, there's some dirt tracks that are like better than others because of the preparation and so forth, you know, and like Springfield. Illinois was just, for me, was the best dirt track in the USAC Champ Car series that because of the preparation of the track and all that. In the United States, to me, probably the best road race track right now is Austin, but because of the length and the variety of corners, Elkhart Lake, Road America, is one that's been drivers' favorite, forever. Yeah, you always have the one, but then the most challenging, was I lucky to have had the opportunity to drive the long Nürburgring, and Spa, that type of thing. So
Spa's a personal favorite of mine, but how was driving the long Nürburgring? Was it?
It was an incredible challenge every lap, mainly because I never felt that I really got to know that place, really, really well. I always felt that I should have run a 1,000K sports car race, to really get much better feel for it. But at the same time, the incredible satisfaction out of completing every single lap there, and getting it right. Feel like I'm getting it right, or at least you say, oh man, I just missed that apex, So try to make sure that you figure, but it's going to take a long way before you come around again to that corner. It's all over that stuff to play. But yeah, those are some of the all-time classics, like the Nürburgring for sure. So I'm just so happy that I had the experience there.
I want to take a quick shift back to some of the people that you've met throughout your time within Formula One and your racing career. Was there any particular person that you truly admired? And if so, how did they impact your career development and how your career went?
Well, it's hard to really to choose, but I admired a lot of people in our business. I mean, icons that I had the opportunity to, even to drive for, like Mr. Ferrari, for instance, as one. I mean, you just really, you never could read him, so you really wanted to please him somehow and try to get a little bit of a wince of a smile out of him or something. And Colin, of course, to me, what I loved about Colin was Colin Chapman was very expressive. He wanted to win, and when you did win, I mean, he showed it. He showed, like, throwing his hat in the air or something. He had that, the beautiful smile of acceptance, and all of these things really play huge, But I had such tremendous respect for Colin because I knew, I mean, look at the world champions that he created, and I knew that even when I joined him, I said, if Colin comes around, he starts focusing on Formula One 100%, I have a shot at this thing, at doing something good. And so it's people like that give you that tremendous hope and feel that I'm with the very best, can't do any better than this. And but along the way, the sport, our sport is so rich, with tremendous talents, the designers, Maurice Philippe and Ralph Bellamy, and I mean, Tony Southgate. I mean, there's so many of these guys that I just I admire so much. I hate to mention just a few because there are so many more. And Adrian Newey, for instance, which is, of course, contemporary. He was my engineer, in '87 in Indy cars, and I don't know if ever had a relationship with any engineer that I felt I was totally understood. And, it was just like our brains were just one, and it gives you that extreme confidence, when you have somebody like that. So, like I said, over the years, I had all these opportunities to work and then even be envious of others, that I never had the opportunity to work with. But again, the time that I was able to spend in the sport is so rich, with the people, that, as you said, the people that I had the opportunity to rub elbows with.
And we have a few questions left here, but to follow on with your comments about Colin Chapman, in 1968, during your first, obviously, race with Lotus at the Glen, you came back into the pits, and this story was retold to us by someone who was there and said, Colin, let me know when you want me to put it on pole. And his response was, go put it on pole. And you did. This was your very first F1 race, first qualifying. And it was an amazing feat by any standard. While you were away from the pits, and this story was actually retold to us by Bob Dance, Colin Chapman looked back at Bob Dance and goes, it's just like having Jimmy back. Hearing this gives me chills, and retelling this to you gives me chills. How does it make you feel?
Well, I don't know if those were the right words, let me know when you want me to put it on pole. I mean, he knew darn well that he could see that I was out there hell for bent. I mean, I was just really going for it. I've never in my life announced, hey, you want me to put her on pole, or I'm going to put her on pole. You never know that. But you know that the mindset, you could read that on anybody's eyes, is there, because you come in and all you want is this little tweak here, this and that, and you go out there and you go faster. And, to have Colin, in my car and everything was just amazing again. And all of it plays because it gives you that confidence, But again, and for somebody like that, that's at that time is bigger than life. You look at it, and I'm driving for him, and he's watching me do my thing. I mean, you really want to reach, and that's and then you reach, and if you obviously come out with a result, I mean, that's it. At least I did my job, and I know he appreciates it and all of that. But, Colin was a racer, through and through. And as I said, he wanted to win. He wanted to be at the top, and you wanted to be with him because you know that he was going to give you every possible opportunity, with the car and all this effort that he had at his disposal, to give you the tools to do that.
Thank you. And your name has been synonymous with racing greatness and racing success, especially in the United States, for a very long time. But really, you've gone so far beyond just the driving experience and being the winning driver. What do you think your major contribution or major contributions have been outside of being the winning driver and being known for being the winning driver?
Well, I don't know. I think probably trying to give the sport everything that I could, and in being part of it, being vocal about suggestions as to the direction that I like to see it go, and only because I care. I mean, even today, obviously I'm not competitive racing, but I have a son, I have grandson, I have family in the sport, and sometimes I'm not very politically correct, because I speak my mind, and if I see that maybe some of the people that are coming in from the outside don't really understand things, I just have a tendency to openly criticize them and everything. And why? Only because I love the sport so much. It's been my life, the wonderful life that I was able to, up to this point, to live and be so happy to endure and be spared of the potential injuries and so forth. So I take nothing for granted, But the bottom line, like I said, if my love for the sport is any contribution, there's no one that has more love for the sport than I do.
And thank you very much for your time today. We do have just one last question for you. And like I said, Bob Dance will be in the audience when this is shown. And he's been around our club for about, I think, just about 10 years now. And we've always known him as a very kind, gentle, and considerate man. So everyone in the crowd wants to know, what's the real scoop on Bob Dance?
The real scoop, I mean, here's a guy, you talk about, in our business, the best title you could bestow on anyone, a racer, a race driver or a mechanic, race mechanic, you're a real racer. And he's a real racer through and through. Ask him one question. He says, Bob, how many race engines have you actually changed in a car over your career? Probably over 1,000. I used to look at these guys after the race, always changing an engine between qualifying the race and everything else. And I mean, that had to be always a daunting job, but they were always really go into it. I said, and I always felt a guy with a career as long as Bob Dances is, I always wondered, how many engines have you changed in a race car during your career? And that would be a great number, actually, to be able to publish.
Well, we'll make sure we ask him. And I hear Clive still has him working on a few as well. Mario, thank you very much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
My pleasure, Brian.
Thank you so much. That was amazing.